Pakistan has only been a country for some 75 years. In this short but eventful period, its hostile relationship with neighbouring India has become a key feature of its national identity. The roots of this lie in the end of British rule on the subcontinent, a period that was punctuated by religious strife between Muslims and Hindus. It is within the context of those tense years of inter-communal tension that we can track the establishment of Pakistan.
Two communities that had lived side by side for hundreds of years were now ripped apart by European imperialism and nationalism, as the partition gave birth to a new nation for the Muslims of India. Under the leadership of its emblematic leader, Mohammad Ali Jinnah, Pakistan secured independence, with the promise of becoming a beacon of light for Muslims of the subcontinent. Islam has been present in India since the days of the Rashidun Khilafah in the 7th century, but it made its big splash onto the Indian political scene some 400 years later with the invasions of Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi. From the end of the 12th century onwards, northern India would be dominated by Muslim states, first by the Ghurids. Then its successors, the Mamluks, established the Delhi Sultanate, which would reign supreme until they were supplanted by the invading Mughals of Babur in the 16th century. In this time, more Indians converted to Islam as Persian and Turkic cultures infused themselves into the local cultures. Cuisine and fashion from Persia, Sufi saints from Turkic Central Asia, and immigration from Afghanistan helped ensure that Islam became a fixture on the Indian socio-political scene. Under the Mughals, the merger between the native Hindu and Islamic cultures reached its magnificent zenith. Mughal emperors married Hindu princesses and patronized Hindu artisans whilst professing their Islamic faith. The Mughals would rule most of India until the 18th century, when after a power vacuum brought about by their decline, saw the Hindu Marathas become the dominant force on the subcontinent. But by the end of the century, the Marathas were supplanted by the modernized armies and administration of the British. For the next 150 years, India would be ruled by Britain. It is during this period that the seeds were sown for sectarian tensions, which would ultimately culminate with the emergence of the nation-state of Pakistan.
After the Indian Mutiny of 1857, India became an official possession of the British Crown, and the Mughal dynasty that had ruled the subcontinent for over 3 centuries was disbanded. In the wake of this tightening grip on India, Muslim intellectuals thought of ways to liberate the Ummah from the tentacles of Western imperialism. One of the earliest and most prominent of these thinkers was the Islamic scholar Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. Born into Indian nobility and having had a career with the East Indian Company, Ahmed Khan remained loyal to the British throughout India's rebellions. In spite of his close connections to the British authorities, Ahmed Khan published The Causes of the Indian Revolt in 1859, which pointed to the policy failures of the colonial administration for having created such unrest. In his writings, Khan explains that the colonial government never included the voices of the Indian public in their legislation or politics. With no public space or institutions to air grievances, the colonial subjects were forced to resort to violent uprisings. Thus, it is imperative for Indians to have a voice in government affairs if the colony is to maintain stability. Although advocating for native Indians to have a voice in government, Khan insisted for the continuation of Britain's colonial authority over India. Beyond the government's role in excluding Indians from legislative affairs, Khan ultimately believed that the biggest reason for the mutiny was the ignorance and backwardness of the native Indians, insisting that the public generally misunderstood the purpose and benefits of the colonial laws bestowed upon them. In fact, he thought many of India's Muslims had strayed away from the proper teachings of Islam due to the colonial government's efforts in hindering religious education. Therefore, the colonial government was also ignorant of the cultural and religious practices of its subjects. The colonial government was also insistent in the social categorization and separation of Hindu and Muslim Indians, conducting censuses that emphasized religious difference as the main communal factor. This new pressure to form holistic groupings pushed Khan to formulate a more cohesive Muslim community in India, one that saw itself as separate from the majority Hindu community, which had a better relationship with the British. Muslim India, however, was very divided among different Sufi brotherhoods and interpretations of the faith. So, to homogenize the Indian Muslim community, Khan attempted to promote a standardized Islam, opening up schools and universities across India that taught theology as well as Western sciences and literature. Khan believed that contrary to traditional Islam, the religious outlook of Indian Muslims was hostile to education and science, contributing to their backwardness and ultimately their subjugation. If people do not shun blind adherence, if they do not seek specially that light which can be found in the Quran and the indisputable Hadith, and do not adjust religion and the sciences of today, Islam will become extinct in India. On top of hoping to educate Indian Muslims, Khan also wished to create a national community, promoting the use of Urdu as the lingua franca of Islamic India. Though at first an advocate of Muslim-Hindu unity, Khan believed that the development of an Islamic India separate from a Hindu one would be more pragmatic in the wake of a British withdrawal. This two-nation theory would form the ideological basis of what would eventually become the national project of Pakistan. British control over India relied heavily on the tactic of divide and conquer, where they played native rulers and peoples against one another. India is an immensely rich country in terms of religions, languages, and ethnicities. By the start of the 20th century, Hindus made up some 70% of the population, whilst Muslims made up the largest minority with roughly 20%. From the turn of the 20th century onwards, there was increasingly concerted efforts from the Indians themselves to push for greater rights. A movement that was spearheaded by the Indian National Congress, which, whilst having a number of prominent Muslim leaders, had a largely Hindu membership. The subsequent fears among certain Muslim elites that any British reforms would favour the well-organised and predominantly Hindu Congress led to the formation of the All India Muslim League in 1906. It is this group that would eventually metamorphosize into leading the call for a separate Muslim nation. But at this early stage, partition was not on the table. In fact, that would come much later on, towards the end of the 1930s.
Crucially, in the interwar years, the works of Muhammad Iqbal helped to create the ideological foundations for a separate homeland for the Muslims of India. Similar to Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, Allama Iqbal argued for a revival of Islamic culture in the face of an aggressive Europe that limited Muslim self-determination. The poet and philosopher worried that in a post-British India demographically dominated by Hindus, the Muslims would not have an opportunity to express their own cultural and political rights. So in 1930, he gave a speech in Allahabad where he suggested Muslim Indians should have their own separate nation state. Iqbal's ideas had a big impact on Mohammad Ali Jinnah, who went on to lead the Pakistan movement. As a mentor of sorts, Iqbal not only crystallized the vision of a separate homeland for the Muslims of India, but also gave legitimacy to Jinnah as the undisputed leader of the Muslims. Iqbal was instrumental in the first place in persuading Jinnah to quit his legal practice in London to come back to India and lead the All India Muslim League. Jinnah, known for his secularist outlook, began to come under the influence of Iqbal's defiant stand on taking pride in their Islamic identity. By the eve of World War II, the activity of Indian activists such as the Congress-affiliated Mahatma Gandhi had forced the British to make a number of concessions to demands for greater political responsibility.
All the while, intercommunal tensions between Muslims and Hindus were rising in a modest yet noticeable manner. During the 1920s, a number of religiously inspired riots had taken place. In 1935, the Government of India Act was passed, giving Indians greater autonomy. 2 years later, provincial elections were held in which both the Muslim League and Congress participated. Jawaharlal Nehru led Congress to winning 707 seats, whilst Mohammad Ali Jinnah's Muslim League could only win 106. The Muslim League's desire to be seen as the sole spokesman for Indian Muslims was dealt a huge blow with this result. Consequently, its leader Jinnah worked hard to expand the party membership. Just 2 years later, the League had a membership of over 1 million. At this point, the League's aim revolved largely around gaining guarantees for Muslim rights being protected, hoping this could be achieved in some sort of a federalized system within a united India. World War II proved crucial for the Muslim League. Congress had supported Gandhi's Quit India campaign that called for non-cooperation with the British, a move that would result in much of Congress's leadership being imprisoned. Jinnah, however, decided to support the British war effort. These set of circumstances allowed Jinnah's Muslim League the chance to actually become the sole political representatives of Muslim Indians. In 1940, a key watershed moment took place when Jinnah made his first official reference to a separate Muslim state with the Lahore Declaration, a position that was firmly rejected by Congress. The prospect of a united independent India would become increasingly unlikely from this moment onwards. Once the Second World War was over, Britain realized the unfeasibility of maintaining its global empire and seemed intent on pulling out of India. At the 1945 similar conference between the British, Congress and the Muslim League, a post-war consensus could not be reached when Congress rejected the League's position for Muslim representatives to only be chosen from their ranks. At the same time, World War II had placed a major strain on the Indian economy. With high unemployment and low food production, the environment was not exactly favourable for moderate politics. The following year, British Prime Minister Clement Attlee established a cabinet mission to discuss the transfer for power to the Indian political leadership and maintain a united India. The proposal was to have a federal union between Hindu and Muslim majority regions, whilst having a central government that would be responsible for certain vital sectors such as defence and foreign policy. Both sides actually agreed to it, albeit somewhat reluctantly. However, soon after that, Congress leader Nehru made a provocative speech in which he undermined hope for the agreement just made. Feeling Congress's acceptance of the plan was insincere, Jinnah withdrew his party's approval. The British were still determined to go ahead with the plan anyway, so the Muslim League called upon their supporters for a day of nationwide protests on August 16, 1946, referred to as Direct Action Day, stating their desire for a Muslim homeland. This day would also be known to posterity as the 1946 Calcutta killings, because the protests soon turned violent as intercommunal tensions between Muslims and Hindus spilled over into riots in the Bengal, and more than 4,000 people lost their lives. These riots would be followed by several other riots between Muslims and Hindus over the next few months. In February 1947, the last British Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, took office. He had been instructed by London to oversee India's independence at the latest by June 1948, and that he was to avoid partition. But Mountbatten soon realised that it was too late in the game for that. Communal violence had gotten to the stage that partition had become inevitable. So he announced the Mountbatten Plan in June 1947, partitioning the subcontinent into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan in the northwest and east. The Muslim League agreed to it. Congress, which had for so long clung on to the vision of a united India, finally accepted it as well. Mountbatten also announced that the British pullout would be taking place almost a year earlier than planned. The agreement was made official by the Indian Independence Act of July 1947, which stated that Pakistan and India would come into being on August 15th of that year. Huge issues still lay ahead before the official partition. Massive ambiguities remained regarding the princely state of Kashmir, a Muslim-majority region with a Hindu ruler that wasn't officially assigned to either country. Also, even though Muslim-majority provinces would become part of Pakistan and vice versa with Hindu-majority provinces, the Punjab and the Bengal were to be treated differently. Despite both being Muslim-majority, Mountbatten decided the two provinces would be divided between the two new states. British civil servant Sir Cyril Radcliffe was chosen to draw an appropriate demarcation line between what was to be the Indian and Pakistani portions of Bengal and Punjab. Radcliffe had never been to India before, so needless to say his work was cut out for him. To make matters even more confusing, Mountbatten kept Radcliffe's line secret until after independence, so that the British would not be blamed for any of the ensuing violence. This was to have horrific human consequences. Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs, fearing that they would end up on the wrong side of the border, decided to move, a process that saw alarming levels of violence take place on both sides. When Pakistan celebrated its independence on August 14th and India on August 15th, neither side knew where the borders were exactly. The partition would leave a huge trauma on the subcontinent, affecting tens of millions of people. Jinnah and the Muslim League had gotten the Muslim state that they fought so hard for, but the fighting wouldn't end there. A few months after partition, the two new states went to war over Kashmir. Their relationship has been tense and turbulent ever since. Thank you guys for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for always supporting. If you want to financially support Hikmah History, there's a link to my Patreon in the description to this video. Until next time, peace!